Ladies and gentlemen, today, we're diving deep into a topic that is front and center in America's economic conversation: housing. Yet again, we're facing a perfect storm of mismanagement, government blunders, and mounting consequences, a reflection of a housing crisis that has been brewing for over a decade. You think that after the Great Recession, we'd have learned our lesson. But no. Here we are, in 2025, and millions of Americans still can't afford a basic home. What went wrong? And why are the solutions being proposed by today's politicians, including Donald Trump as he makes his way back to the White House, failing to provide real answers? Let's dissect the economic problems behind America's housing predicament and the political circus surrounding it. The American dream has long revolved around a simple ideal: owning your home. But for many people, especially young and low-income families, that dream is now entirely out of reach. First-time buyers are getting locked out of the market, which not only impacts their ability to build wealth but puts barriers in place for the future. Homeownership has been one of the primary means by which Americans accumulate generational wealth. If our young population can't enter the housing market, we're creating a domino effect where future generations are left without a solid financial base. Look at the data. According to Zillow, there's a shortage of approximately 4.3 million homes in the US, and that gap isn't shrinking. In fact, it's getting wider. The share of first-time homebuyers fell to 26% in 2023 from 45% in 2010, making it the lowest in 30 years. Prices have skyrocketed to unprecedented levels. From 2020 to 2023 alone, home prices soared by over 40% in key metropolitan markets, driven by supply shortages, labor costs, and inflation. So what's the root cause here? Let's take a closer look. One of the key causes of this crisis can be traced back to the Great Recession in 2008. The housing market collapsed, builders retracted, and construction slowed dramatically. Despite a growing population, the country never fully recovered in terms of home building. You could say America effectively hit a pause button on housing supply, and that pause has spilled into the 2020s with devastating consequences. The lack of new homes is now coming to a head. During the peak years before the recession, U.S. builders were constructing about 2 million homes annually. Today, that figure hovers around 1.4 million per year, far from enough, considering population growth. According to a study by Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, U.S. population growth outpaces new housing supply by 2 trillion. This brings me to the heart of the matter: government incompetence and red tape. We can place some blame directly at the feet of local zoning laws, which have stifled development left and right. NIMBYism, not in my backyard, bureaucratic bottlenecks, environmental regulation. These obstacles have made building anywhere near cities next to impossible. Then, you have state and local governments failing to adopt zoning reforms to allow higher density housing. A Los Angeles case in 2022, for instance, saw significant housing projects halted because of lawsuits by local groups arguing that construction violated environmental regulations. Bureaucracy like a boa constrictor is choking one of the nation's most critical sectors, not to mention encouraging wealth inequality. Now, let's talk about Trump. Facing this worsening crisis, Trump's 2024 campaign is showcasing his bold idea to use federal public lands for housing development. It sounds exciting, right? A new frontier to ease housing pressure. But once you dig beneath the surface, his solution begins to crumble, a veritable mirage in the desert. According to the Bureau of Land Management, the federal government controls over 40 million acres of land across the U.S., most of it concentrated in the West. Trump suggests repurposing some of that land for housing construction, bypassing local zoning laws and bureaucratic red tape. The approach has bipartisan support because it sounds simple: more land means more houses. But hold on. Most of this land is located in remote, rural areas, far away from economic centers where many Americans live and want to work. The key problem, as critics are quick to point out, is that building homes on federal land in the middle of nowhere doesn't help people who want to live in thriving urban or suburban areas, places with job opportunities, good schools, and cultural amenities. What good is a house in the high desert of Nevada when the jobs and services are in urban hubs like Los Angeles or San Francisco? Moreover, much of this land is used for other purposes like recreation, wilderness preservation, energy extraction, and agriculture. Divvying it up for housing may lead to significant environmental and economic trade-offs. Again, we're talking about short-sighted, surface-level solutions typical of economic policymakers these days, who seek quick remedies without considering long-term consequences. Trump's Freedom Cities idea, a proposal for futuristic new cities complete with flying cars, is a flashy distraction rather than a serious solution to the housing crisis gripping the nation's real cities and towns. I must give credit where it's due. The idea of utilizing federal land near urban centers does have some merit. Some areas, particularly in states like Utah, Nevada, and Idaho, present potential opportunities for development close enough to cities. Studies have shown that 217,000 acres of federally owned land sit within the boundaries of cities in Utah alone, while an additional 650,000 acres are within a mile of these city limits. With the right development plan, one that focuses on proximity to jobs, services, and economic activity, this approach could potentially make a dent in home supply. But mark my words, this isn't the ultimate fix, and it won't happen fast. When you take into account housing costs, construction limitations, and political opposition, you'll quickly realize that opening federal land for development is not the silver bullet it's being promoted as. It's piecemeal at best, and it won't come close to solving the systemic issues surrounding the housing shortage. For one thing, the permitting process for converting even these small portions of federal land into viable housing projects could still take years, if not decades. Moreover, what we're missing is infrastructure: roads, electricity, water, sewage, schools, hospitals, you name it. These remote areas will need billions of dollars worth of infrastructure, which, again, raises questions: who will pay for it? But let's not forget, even if we solve the federal land problem, NIMBYism remains a massive choke point in urban housing development. People living in affluent, established neighborhoods are notoriously opposed to higher density housing in their communities. They often lobby against zoning changes that would allow for the construction of apartments or townhouses, which could add the much-needed supply to meet demand in high-value markets. A survey from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition in 2024 revealed that over 75% of American cities with a population over 500,000 are facing significant community resistance to proposed affordable housing developments. This is even truer in high-demand coastal metros like San Francisco, New York, and Seattle, where affluent residents bemoan the presence of cheaper housing options as detrimental to their living conditions and property values. The economic consequence of the shortage? Well, it's simple, isn't it? When demand outstrips supply, prices rise. Rent is through the roof. Between 2020 and 2024, the average rent in major cities increased by over 20% nationwide. At the higher end of the spectrum, cities like San Francisco and New York saw rent surges closer to 35%, leaving many middle and lower income earners unable to keep up with the rising costs. Homelessness, too, has spiked across the country. You probably remember the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority's 2023 report showing that homelessness has increased by 10% year-on-year. Cities that were already struggling to provide adequate housing for their populations are now seeing an exodus of middle-class professionals, all priced out of the housing market. This brings us to long-term societal damage. Wealth inequality is widening. Households that bought homes before the current crunch are seeing their wealth grow disproportionately as their home values soar, while younger generations and renters are driven deeper into poverty or forced to delay major life milestones like starting a family or saving for retirement. The implications of a housing crisis ripple across the economy. When people spend more than 30% of their income on housing, a ratio that economists say signals severe cost burden, they're left with less disposable income to spend on other goods and services. This downshift in consumer spending impacts virtually every other sector, from retail to healthcare to education. In parallel, rising housing costs also increase wage demands from workers, which puts added pressure on businesses and contributes to the inflationary spiral. The Commercial Real Estate Development Association, NLP, study conducted in 2024 noted that housing shortages in key markets like New York, Chicago, and Miami have directly slowed local economic growth by as much as 1.2% annually. In the grand scheme, this means that our inability to build homes is acting as a direct brake on U.S. GDP expansion. When people can't live where the jobs are, business investment and employment decline, a vicious cycle that has been seen in economic hubs like San Francisco and Seattle. So, what's the bottom line here? Americans deserve real solutions, not political soundbites. Using federal land is a start, but if you scratch beneath the surface, Trump's proposal is far from the panacea he claims. The key takeaway is that we've got a broken system. Zoning laws need reform. Local governments need to ease up on restrictions that prevent the construction of affordable, high-density housing. We need to overhaul neighborhood planning to accommodate both growth and environmental concerns effectively. On a wider scale, federal and state governments need to collaborate on crafting long-term housing strategies, ones that are grounded in economic realities and not reliant on developer-driven, profit-focused motives. This means pushing for housing initiatives that incentivize high-density development in key areas, hold developers accountable to affordability needs, and drive down labor and material costs through innovations in construction technology. Yes, federal land development is a piece of the puzzle. But more is necessary. Far more. We need bold ideas. We don't just need homes built in the middle of nowhere. We need homes where people want and need to live, in bustling, dynamic cities that offer promise and opportunity for all citizens, not just the few who can afford ever-rising prices. Until we confront the deeper systemic forces at play, we'll continue to rehash tired proposals and America's housing crisis will only worsen. Thank you for listening, and as always, stay informed and stay critical.